Hi, my name is Toby and you've just been listening to my 11 years old Bugera 6262. In this video I'm going to tell you about my thoughts, in terms of reliability and sound after using this amplifier for over 10 years now. I just discovered that one of my very old videos about the Bugera had almost 80,000 views and over 200 very nice comments from you guys, so thank you very much for this. This actually made me want to make a new video about the Bugera because there are like many review videos about this amp, but nobody was really telling you, about his experiences after using it for so many years. So I really want to go a little bit into detail, about the reliability and the sound, does it really sound like a 6505? And I'm also showing you a frequency comparison later. The Bugera 6260 and the Bugera 6262 actually sound surprisingly close to, the counterparts, which is obviously the Peavey 6505 and the Peavey 6505 Plus. Actually I'm a Peavey diehard, and after doing countless of tests and frequency analysis and recordings, I really have to admit that the Bugera is possibly the closest you can get to a 6505 sound for this amount of money. So I'm sure you're going to like to hear how this amplifier performs in the long run. But to be fair, my old video, which is I think maybe 8 or 9 years old, didn't really do justice to the sound of these amplifiers. In my old video I was actually recording the Bugera 6262 through a very cheap 4x12 guitar cabinet with no-name speakers and a Chinese copy of a Shure SM57 in pretty low volume because I was still living at my parents' house. And it was very difficult to get a really good sound out of this amp. So let's turn the last 10 years into something good and let's probably record this amp for you. You were actually hearing a proper recording of this guitar amplifier in the beginning sequence of my video where I was playing my metal riff. And let me now first show you how the amp actually sounds outside of the mix without drums and double tracking. So before I'm preparing the amp for recording, let me talk through my signal chain first. So I'm going to use my ESP Eclipse E-II. So it's a special model with a full thickness body. So this body is even thicker than the bodies from regular ESP Eclipse models. And I have a specific set of EMG 57 and 66. It's a TW set. These active pickups, of course humbuckers, they are voiced more or less like Path vintage pickups from Gibson. And what's so special about these pickups is that underneath, when you actually pull these knobs, underneath there are single coils. So you're not splitting your humbucker into single coil mode, but you actually disengage the entire humbucker and use a dedicated single coil, which is actually hidden underneath the humbuckers in the wood. Okay, so it's really nice because you have like a really good single coil sound because you are using actual single coils rather than splitting your humbuckers in half. So I will hook this guitar up straight into my Maxon OD 808, which is going straight into the Bugera 6262. And to record this amp, I'm not using a real cabinet, but I will actually hook the Bugera up to my 2 Notes Torpedo Captor, which is a reactive loadbox. And you will have the entire signal of the guitar amplifier from the preamp section and the power section. And this will go straight into my DAW, where I'm going to load some Ownhammer impulse responses. And actually I'm using a Mesa 4x12 guitar cabinet with a Shure SM57. And I think it sounds really, really good. Listen to these palm mutes, seriously. So you were hearing this guitar amp and it sounds really incredibly good. However, there's something I want to talk to you about, which is one of the questions which is almost as old as the Bugera 6262 itself. Does it sound like the Peavey 6505? So this is a question many people were actually asking in the past, and I have to say it sounds very, very similar. There have been huge discussions about it, and yes, the gain structure is a little bit different because actually when you compare guitar amplifier sounds, there are like two things you actually have to consider. You know, the first thing is the voicing, so it's the frequency response of your bass, mids and treble. This is what you can actually tweak using EQs and some stuff. The second thing is the actual gain structure, so, you know, the way your distortion sounds. And this is a little bit different. So the Bugera is not perfectly on par with the Peavey 5150 or 6505 in terms of, you know, gain structure, but it does an incredibly good job. And to be honest, you know, if you hear the difference between the real 6505 and the Bugera 6262, and I'm not going to make this because first I don't have a 6505 because I'm playing the Peavey Invective. And secondly, there are like a ton of videos on YouTube already, so if you want to see it, you can actually always take a look. And, you know, it sounds very, very similar, but does it really sound like 4 times the price similar? I don't think so. The Bugera is actually so similar to the 6505 that you wouldn't really expect the Bugera being so cheap, actually. So I don't really want to say cheap because these amps are actually, let's call it pricey, because you get an insane value for your money. One of the problems I had in the past was to actually prove how close the Bugera sounds to the Peavey 6505, okay? And I was actually doing a funny video about this one because we were actually checking out the real 6505, comparing it to a Bugera 6262. And my bandmate and me, we were really surprised how similar it sounds. And back in the days, the Peavey was like 4 times the price. And you wouldn't really hear like 4 times the difference, if you know what I mean, okay? So the actual difference you were hearing in between both amps would never make you believe that it's actually like, you know, 4 times cheaper. So we ended up making a funny video on YouTube where we pretended to play the Peavey 6505 and we also wrote it into the title. But in reality, we've been playing the Bugera 6262. And everything was fine until in the very end, the viewers had to discover that we actually switched off the Peavey, but my bandmate still was playing the guitar and you were still able to hear it. And then I was moving the camera over to the Bugera, which was switched on and actually connected to the guitar cab. Okay, and you can actually see that a lot of people dislike this one. I'm wondering why. To really show you the difference in the response, I actually was this time making a frequency analysis for you. And in order to make it as detailed as possible, I was recording my guitar straight into a looper pedal, and then I was connecting this looper pedal to both of these amps. So I was one time running the exact same riff into the Peavey Invective, and then I was doing the same for the Bugera. To record this, I actually used the reactive loadbox. So it actually captures the signal from your power amp section, which means you can record the very exact signal your guitar amp would also send to your guitar cabinet. Okay, then I was loading some quality IRs in my DAW and actually compared the frequency. So the software I did use for comparison is Isotope's Magic Q from Ozone. And let me actually show you the result. And before you ask, I was using, of course, the lead channels of both amps, and every knob was at 12 o'clock, so you have like the very basic setting of these guitar amps. And the gain was tweaked, so they are actually on the same gain level, okay? And this is how it looks like. At the bottom you can actually see 2 different frequency responses, and the left one, the orange one, is the one from the Peavey Invective, and the blue one is the exact same guitar signal and riff through the Bugera 6262. So what this Magic Q does is that it actually compares the signal of your second signal, the blue one, and tries to change it to sound exactly like the first one. And this is what you can actually see in the center of this graphic. You know, there are like these 2 different frequency responses overlapping each other, and there's this white line, and the white line is showing what you have to change on the frequencies of the Bugera to have the same frequency response like the Peavey Invective. So you can see underneath 60 Hz, the Bugera needs a lot of boost because the Peavey has a lot more bass. And usually it's not really a big problem because these very low bass frequencies are mostly, in drum space. So this is usually kick drum territory and bass guitar territory. So, it's not really a big issue in my opinion. So in the 150 Hertz region, you can actually see that the Magic EQ from Ozone was, pushing the Bugera down a little bit because the Bugera's frequency were a little bit louder. But if you take a look to the right side of the chart, you can see that this is maybe not even 1 dB difference, okay? So it's almost nothing. However, when you take a look at 2000 Hertz, you can see that there's like a 2 dB boost from the Magic EQ, which means that this frequency is a little bit, cut out on the Bugera, and the Magic EQ tries to boost it in order to be on par with the Peavey Invective. Then between 3000 and 600 Hertz, which is more or less the presence area of your guitar, you can see that the Bugera is a little bit louder than the Peavey Invective, so the Magic EQ is reducing the signal again. And then you can see above 10 Hertz, the frequency starts to drop because the Bugera has a lot more top-end fizz, and the Magic EQ is actually trying to reduce it to be on par with the Peavey Invective. So if you think this is like a huge difference in between the Bugera 6262 and the Peavey Invective, believe me, it's not. And to prove it to you, I was doing another comparison. So I was comparing the Peavey Invective to my Marshall JVM 410. So this is the graphic, and you can again see the Peavey Invective in orange and the Marshall JVM in blue. So the Magic EQ is again trying to change the EQ from the Marshall to sound like the Peavey Invective. When we take a look at the white line, you can see that the Magic EQ is trying to push the bass underneath 60 Hz a lot because the Marshall has way less bass. And what's also very interesting is that many people actually believe that Marshalls have like a ton of mid-range. But as you can see in this graphic, you can actually see that the Magic EQ from Ozone is trying to boost the mids of the Marshall to have the same amount of mids as the Peavey Invective, which is actually amazing because many people say that these American sounding amps like the Peaveys, they have almost no mids, but it's not really true. But what's also very interesting is that when you take a look at the 6000 Hz range, you can see that there is like a huge dip in the signal because the Magic EQ is trying to reduce these frequencies of the Marshall a lot in order to be equal to the ones from the Peavey Invective. And many people actually think Marshalls have a lot of mids and not really a lot of top end, but in fact the Marshall sound is actually made of a lot of top end and not so much mids. And this graphic also proves it. So as you can see, the difference between the Marshall and the Peavey Invective is a lot bigger than comparing the Bugera to the Peavey Invective. So you can really trust me, these amps sound very, very similar. And of course there's a small difference, because these are different amps after all. Even if the Bugera is designed to sound like a Peavey 6505, but they use different electronic parts. The circuitry may be the same, but when you use different parts, the resulting sound will still be a little bit different. So you can hear a small difference in the gain structure. And as I said, and as you were able to see actually, the Bugera had a little bit more top end, whereas the Peavey Invective actually had like a little bit more balls. And this is just a small difference actually. So do you think you really hear the difference when you have like a fully produced metal album and somebody was using a Bugera 6262 and you didn't know it was a Bugera 6262? Would you really hear that this highly processed guitar is actually sounding different than a 6505? I don't really think so, to be honest. So what else? Okay, let's talk about the reliability. This is something I also wanted to talk about. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I'm owning this amp for over a decade now. I don't have the build anymore and I can't remember properly, but I must have bought it somewhere in 2008 or early 2009. And one of the issues Bugera had in the beginning was that some of their amps was actually blowing up very easily, and a lot of people were reporting that they got a new Bugera 6260 or Bugera 6262 and just maybe a few hours or a few days later they actually died and there was no sound coming out of the amps anymore. And to be honest, I had the same issue. The problem was actually some kind of a plastic clip that was melting, and then, a part of the circuitry lost contact, and then actually the amp was just dead silent, and no matter what you did with the volume knob, there was no sound coming out of the amp anymore. And what's really sad about this one is that it wasn't really a clip produced by Bugera, because it was just a third-party supplier part. And, you know, they didn't really know they are breaking down, you know. Of course, they did some quality tests to their amplifiers and check if the amps are working properly, but none of the guys who is checking these guitar amps is playing these amps for a couple of hours to see like if something melts inside of the amp. And this was a big problem, because a lot of people actually bought the Bugera, and after playing it for a couple of days, it suddenly was silent and was dead, okay? So it's really not so nice. So luckily, because this problem was easily identified, the new amps left the production with a very good and solid fix, so you don't have any issues with the reliability again. Eventually I was sending my guitar amp back to the shop to get it fixed. And what's really nice is that they actually took the amp apart and fixed the plastic clip rather than giving me a brand new head. Because this new head might also have a broken clip, and when you play it for a couple of hours, it suddenly, you know, switches off and that's it. Okay, so they fixed it. And hands down, I had absolutely zero issues with this guitar amp in the past 11 years after getting it fixed. The knobs are working fine, the buttons are working fine, the foot switch is still fine, the FX loop, everything works just like a charm. It's really absolutely no problem. Okay, so you really have to believe me that if I'm not able to break this amp, you won't be either. And the only thing that I noticed about the material is that the knobs are not the most solid knobs. So they still work, they never broke, I didn't have to change any of the knobs. But the problem is when you turn them, you know, they are just a little bit soft. And with these chicken head knobs, it's very easy that when you turn them, you know, you easily scratch a little bit on these numbers. And the only difference I had after 11 years is that when you take a look at my lead channel volume knob, you can actually see that I was scratching off a couple of these numbers, but that's pretty much it. I mean, as long as you know it's the volume knob, you always turn it up to the taste, okay? So you don't really need the numbers anyway. It's just really some, you know, look problem more or less. And otherwise the materials are totally fine. Long story short, 10 years ago, a lot of people were making fun of the reliability of the Bugera amps, but I think this is my proof that the reliability of these amps is just on par with a lot of different manufacturers. So if the price, the sound, and the reliability isn't the issue, what's the issue then? And the answer is absolutely nothing, honestly. So I was trying hard to find something negative about this guitar amp. And I was trying a lot of different amps. So I was owning an Engelfire ball, an Engelpower ball, and I sold both. I had a Uhtred and Kettner Grandmeister Deluxe 40 and I sold it. I was trying Yerasoft bulldozers, different Fame amps. I even was trying a Mesa Boogie rectifier, and whereas the rectifier is a perfect amp in my opinion, it's just not the sound that I like, okay? So it's more a taste issue, and of course maybe a little bit of price, okay? But, you know, what I want to tell you is that I was trying a shitload of different amps. And you can really believe me that when I say the sound of the Bugera is really good, it is really good. Okay, you now may ask like, okay, dude, you are saying the Bugera is so nice and you've been playing it for so many years. Why did you buy the Peavey Invective then? The reason is obvious. I've been a Peavey fan ever since. I've always been in love with the 6505 sound. And I always dreamed about getting a 6505. And of course, as you advance, you always want to try some new gear, okay? So at some point you just buy more expensive equipment because maybe you think that you actually just sound better if you use more expensive gear, which isn't always true in my opinion, but anyway. Or maybe your favorite guitar player is using a specific kind of gear and you want to try it out, okay? But nevertheless, I do not regret any minute I have spent with the Bugera, honestly. So in case of any one of you Bugera guys is actually watching this video, thank you so much for making this guitar amp, because this was really like a dream coming true when I was younger and I was not able to get the real 6505 tone, and this amp made it totally possible for me to get it to the same ballpark even with not such a big kind of a budget. So this is the end of the video now. So I really want to say thank you for watching this video up to this point. And if you enjoyed this, actually I would really appreciate if you could give me a thumbs up for this one. And if you want to stay in touch with me and talk about guitar stuff, you can always write a comment. and subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my videos. Okay, so hopefully see you next time. Bye.